A 12-year-old black boy kept following a cop's wife every morning. When cop finally discovered why, he immediately called for backup. The sunrise hadn't touched the neighborhood yet when Marcus pressed his nose against the cold window glass. His bedroom on the second floor gave him a perfect view of Oak Street, where the same red blouse appeared every morning at exactly 6:45 a.m. His grandmother's cough echoed from down the hall. Marcus glanced at his worn digital watch, 6:42 a.m. 3 minutes left. Marcus? Baby? You up? His grandmother's voice cracked between coughs. Coming, Grandma. He kept his eyes on the street. Just a few more minutes. The dashboard clock in a parked car blinked 6:45 a.m. Right on time, Sarah turned the corner. Her red blouse bright against the gray morning light. She walked with quick, purposeful steps, her ponytail swinging with each stride. Marcus noticed she carried her usual leather bag, the one with the pharmacy logo. His grandmother coughed again, harder this time. Marcus pulled away from the window, his fingers leaving smudges on the glass. The old wooden floor creaked under his feet as he hurried to her room. I'm here, Grandma. He pushed open her door. The medicine bottles on her nightstand caught the dim light, 3 of them almost empty. She sat up slowly, her breath wheezing. Did you sleep at all, baby? Yeah. He didn't mention the hours spent watching the street, counting cars, waiting for morning. Marcus helped her sit up straight, adjusting the pillows behind her back. Her shoulders felt bonier than last month. The calendar on her wall showed 3 doctor's appointments marked in red. Below it, a stack of unopened medical bills sat on her dresser. Time for morning meds, he said, reaching for the bottles. His hands moved automatically, sorting pills he'd memorized by shape and color. 2 white ones for blood pressure, 1 blue for her heart. The half pill that was supposed to last until next week. Such a good boy. She patted his hand. Just like your daddy was. Marcus kept his eyes on the pills. Water, please. In the kitchen, Marcus filled a glass while watching through the window. Sarah was still visible, walking past the Thompson house. Officer Jack stood in his driveway in full uniform, coffee mug in hand. Marcus ducked slightly as the officer's gaze swept the street. Back in his grandmother's room, Marcus handed her the water and watched her take each pill. Her hands shook less today. Good sign. You'll be late for school, she said between sips. Got time. He glanced at his watch. Sarah would be turning onto Maple Street now, heading toward the pharmacy where she worked. His grandmother set down the glass. Something on your mind, baby? Marcus shook his head. How could he explain he'd been watching the pharmacist's wife for weeks? That he'd memorized her schedule, hoping to find a way to ask for help without involving social services? I'm gonna get ready for school, he said, kissing her forehead. Back in his room, Marcus pulled on his striped polo shirt, the cleanest one he had. Through the window, he caught a last glimpse of Sarah's red blouse disappearing around the corner. Officer Jack was still in his driveway, now on his phone. Marcus grabbed his backpack, lighter than usual without last month's textbooks. The school library had been understanding about the lost books, but they couldn't let him check out new ones. Lunch money's on the counter, his grandmother called out. Marcus picked up the $5 bill she'd left, the same $5 bill he'd been putting back every day this week. He slipped it into his pocket, next to the folded pharmacy prescriptions he carried everywhere. Outside, the morning air felt heavy with coming rain. Marcus started walking, keeping to the same route Sarah took. Not too close. Never too close. Just enough to see which way she turned. A police cruiser rolled past slowly. Marcus recognized Officer Jack behind the wheel, his eyes fixed forward but his head turning slightly to track Marcus's movement. The boy's shoulders tensed, but he kept walking at the same pace. The pharmacy sign came into view 6 blocks later. Sarah's red blouse was visible through the front windows as she prepared to open the store. Marcus stopped at the corner, watching. The prescriptions in his pocket felt heavy. Hey, kid. Officer Jack's voice cut through the morning quiet. The cruiser had circled back. Marcus's heart jumped. He turned away from the pharmacy and started walking quickly towards school, his mind racing. Not today. He wasn't ready yet. The cruiser drove parallel to him for half a block before accelerating away. Marcus kept his eyes on the sidewalk, counting cracks, trying to steady his breathing. Behind him, the pharmacy's lights flickered on. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd find the courage to walk through those doors. The school bell rang in the distance. Marcus picked up his pace, the prescription still burning in his pocket. His grandmother would need those pills soon. Very soon. In his head, he could already hear her coughing. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the pre-dawn silence. Marcus sat at the table, bills spread out in front of him. The numbers blurred together after 3 hours of sleep. $247.50 for the heart medication. $183.25 for the blood pressure pills. Past due stamps in angry red across both. Marcus. His grandmother's voice drifted down from upstairs. What time is it, baby? He quickly swept the bills into a drawer. Almost 6, Grandma. Stay in bed. I'll bring your breakfast. The oatmeal was thin, stretched with extra water. Marcus added the last spoonful of sugar, stirring until it dissolved. The pantry held one more box of oatmeal and half a loaf of bread. It would have to last until Friday. Upstairs, his grandmother sat propped against her pillows, looking smaller than yesterday. You're up early again. Couldn't sleep. He set the oatmeal on her lap tray, carefully arranging her morning pills beside the bowl. 2 pills missing from yesterday's count. The blue bottle almost empty. She touched his cheek. You're worried about something. Just school stuff. He forced a smile. Eat while it's warm. Through her window, he saw Sarah's red blouse appearing right on schedule. His grandmother followed his gaze. That's Officer Thompson's wife, isn't it? The pharmacist? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Such a nice lady. She helped me once, you know, back when I could still walk to the pharmacy myself. The sound of a car engine made Marcus step back from the window. Officer Jack's cruiser rolled past slowly, like it did every morning now. Finish your breakfast, Grandma. I need to get ready for school. In his room, Marcus pulled on the same striped polo shirt. It needed washing, but the laundromat money had gone to his grandmother's pills last week. A knock on the front door made him freeze. Through his window, he saw Officer Jack's cruiser parked across the street. Marcus! His grandmother called out. Can you see who it is? His heart pounding, Marcus crept downstairs. The knock came again, harder this time. Hello? A woman's voice. Not Sarah's. This is Mrs. Peterson from Central Middle School. Marcus opened the door to find his school counselor standing there, clutching a folder. Good morning, Marcus. I've been trying to reach your grandmother. May I come in? He blocked the doorway. She's not feeling well. Mrs. Peterson's eyes took in his wrinkled shirt, the dark circles under his eyes. You've missed 4 days this month. Your teachers are concerned. I had a stomach bug. The lie felt heavy on his tongue. Marcus Dash. I had to get ready for school. He started to close the door. Wait. She held out the folder. These are your makeup assignments. And Marcus? My door is always open if you need to talk. He took the folder without meeting her eyes. As Mrs. Peterson walked back to her car, Marcus saw Officer Jack's cruiser still idling across the street. Upstairs, his grandmother had fallen asleep, her oatmeal half-eaten. Marcus counted her remaining pills while she slept. 3 days' worth, maybe 4 if they split some in half. The morning passed in a blur of voices he couldn't focus on. At lunch, Marcus sat alone, the $5 bill still in his pocket. He watched other kids buy food, his own stomach growling. Sarah's red blouse caught his eye through the pharmacy window as he walked home. She was helping an elderly customer, smiling, pointing at something behind the counter. Marcus touched the prescriptions in his pocket. Move along, kid. Officer Jack's voice made him jump. The cruiser had pulled up beside him. Marcus walked faster, his face burning. Behind him, he heard the officer speaking into his radio. Keep an eye on that Williams boy. Something's not right there. His grandmother was coughing when he got home. Hard, racking coughs that shook her whole body. Just need my medicine, she gasped between coughs. Marcus ran to check her pillbox. Empty. He'd miscounted. The next refill was still days away, and they had no money for it anyway. I'll get you some water. He filled a glass with shaking hands, his mind racing. Through the kitchen window, he saw Sarah walking home, her shift over. She lived just 3 blocks away. His grandmother's cough echoed down the stairs. Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow he would follow Sarah all the way to the pharmacy. Tomorrow he would find a way to ask for help. But first, he had to get through another night of counting pills that weren't there. The evening crept by. Marcus heated soup for dinner, the last can. His grandmother managed 2 spoonfuls before the coughing started again. He stayed beside her bed until she fell into an uneasy sleep, her breathing raspy. In his room, Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool window glass. Sarah's house was dark except for one upstairs light. Officer Jack's cruiser sat in the driveway, a dark shape behind the wheel. Marcus pulled out the prescriptions, smoothing the wrinkled papers. The pharmacy's logo seemed to glow in the darkness. Tomorrow, he told himself again. Tomorrow he'd find the courage. But as he watched Officer Jack's cruiser circle the block one last time, Marco wondered if tomorrow might already be too late. The sound of his grandmother falling shattered the morning silence. Marcus bolted upright in his chair where he'd fallen asleep watching the street. The clock read 6:15 a.m. Grandma! He sprinted down the hall to her bathroom. The door was closed. Grandma, can you hear me? A weak moan answered him. I'm okay, baby. Just got dizzy. Marcus jiggled the handle. Locked. Open the door. Grandma, give me a minute. Her voice sounded wrong. Slurred. I'm going to count to 3. Then I'm breaking it down. His heart hammered against his ribs. 1. The lock clicked. Marcus pushed the door open to find his grandmother on the floor, gripping the sink. A small cut on her forehead trickled blood. Oh, God. He grabbed a washcloth, pressing it to her head. We need to call an ambulance. No. She clutched his arm. No hospitals. No doctors. We can't afford it. But Dash, help me up, baby. I'll be fine. It took 10 minutes to get her back to bed. The cut wasn't deep, but her face was pale, her skin clammy. Where are my morning pills? She asked. Marcus's stomach clenched. Let me check. In the bathroom, he gripped the sink where drops of his grandmother's blood still stained the porcelain. The medicine cabinet held only empty bottles. He'd been splitting her last pills in half, then quarters. Now there was nothing left. Through the window, he saw Sarah walking past in her red blouse. His watch read 6:45 a.m. Marcus! His grandmother called weakly. He straightened his shoulders and walked back to her room. The pharmacy doesn't open for another hour. We don't have money for Dash. I'll figure something out. He tucked the blanket around her. Tried to sleep. Outside, the morning was unusually cold. Marcus pulled his arms tight against his body, the prescriptions crumpled in his hand. He'd never skipped school before, but today wasn't about school. Sarah was already 2 blocks ahead, moving quickly. Marcus followed, keeping to the shadows of trees and parked cars. Officer Jack's cruiser wasn't in his driveway today. Small mercy. The pharmacy's lights were still off when Sarah unlocked the front door. Marcus watched from behind a newspaper stand as she disappeared inside. His grandmother's blood was still under his fingernails. You're out early. Marcus spun around. Officer Jack stood there in full uniform, arms crossed. I was just following my wife. Again. The officer's hand rested on his belt. Want to tell me why? Marcus backed away, his heart in his throat. The prescriptions felt like they were burning a hole in his pocket. I asked you a question, son. I need to get to school. Marcus turned and ran, his feet pounding against the sidewalk. He didn't stop until he reached his street, lungs burning. Through his tears, he saw Mrs. Warner from next door watching through her window, phone in hand. She'd been the one who called the police last week about a suspicious young man in the neighborhood. Inside, his grandmother was having another coughing fit. Baby, she called between coughs. Why aren't you at school? Marcus slumped against her doorframe. Principal called. Teacher workday. The lie tasted bitter, but not as bitter as watching her gasp for breath without her medicine. The day crawled by. Marcus made soup from hot water and the last bouillon cube. His grandmother couldn't keep it down. By afternoon, her skin felt hot to the touch. Maybe. She struggled to focus on his face. Maybe it's time to call your Aunt Joyce. She's not our family anymore. Not since she tried to have his grandmother declared unfit last year. We don't need her. The door knocker rattled downstairs. Marcus peered out the window to see Sarah standing on their porch, still in her red blouse. His breath caught. Hello. Sarah's voice carried up the stairs. Mrs. Williams? Marcus? I saw your prescription refills are due. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen. Help was right there, just down the stairs. Then he saw Officer Jack's cruiser turning onto their street. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. After what felt like hours, he heard Sarah's footsteps leaving the porch. The cruiser's engine faded into the distance. His grandmother's voice was barely a whisper. "Who was it, baby?" "Nobody, Grandma. Just the wind." That night, Marcus sat by her bed counting her breaths instead of pills. The prescriptions lay on his desk, illuminated by streetlight. Tomorrow was Friday. The pharmacy would be busy. Officer Jack usually worked a double shift on Fridays. Tomorrow, Marcus decided, no more running, no more hiding. Tomorrow he would follow Sarah one last time. And this time, he wouldn't turn back. Friday morning came with a light drizzle. Marcus stood in the pharmacy parking lot, rain soaking through his striped polo shirt. He'd left his grandmother sleeping, a neighbor's phone number by her bed in case of emergency. The prescriptions in his pocket were damp with rain and sweat. Sarah's red blouse appeared through the pharmacy windows as she prepared for opening. 6:30 a.m. 15 minutes until the doors unlocked. A police radio crackled nearby. Marcus's heart stopped. "Got eyes on the Williams kid." Officer Jack's voice. "Is at the pharmacy again." Marcus pressed himself against the building's brick wall. The cruiser was parked across the street, almost invisible in the pre-dawn gloom. "Copy that," another voice responded. "Want backup?" "Not yet. Let's see what he does." The pharmacist's lights flickered on. Marcus watched Sarah moving behind the counter, arranging pill bottles. His grandmother's cough echoed in his memory. The door lock clicked. 6:45 a.m. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Good morning. You're here early." His mouth went dry. Words he'd rehearsed 100 times vanished. "Can I help you find something?" Sarah's voice was gentle. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled out the prescriptions. The paper was wrinkled, stained with rain and tears. He smoothed it against the counter. Sarah's eyes widened as she read. These are Mrs. Williams' prescriptions." "Your grandmother's." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The door chimed again. Heavy footsteps behind him. "Everything okay here, Sarah?" Officer Jack's hand rested on his weapon. "Jack, wait dash," Sarah started. But Marcus was already running, pushing past the officer, out into the rain. His feet slipped on wet pavement as he sprinted down the street. "Stop!" Officer Jack's voice boomed behind him. Marcus ran harder, lungs burning. Left on Oak Street. Right on Maple. His vision blurred with tears or rain or both. A police siren wailed. Red and blue lights painted the wet streets. Marcus cut through backyards, jumping fences. His grandmother needed those pills. He had to get home. Had to make sure she was okay. He burst through his front door, gasping for air. "Marcus!" His grandmother's weak voice called from upstairs. "Baby, is that you?" Before he could answer, a thud echoed from her room. Then silence. "Grandma!" Marcus took the stairs 2 at a time. "Grandma!" She lay crumpled beside her bed, not moving. "No, no, no." He dropped to his knees beside her. "Wake up. Please wake up." Her skin was cold and clammy. Her breathing shallow. Sirens wailed closer. Marcus ran to the window. 2 police cruisers blocked the street. Officer Jack stepped out of one, speaking into his radio. Sarah's red blouse appeared in the passenger seat of the second car. "Help!" Marcus screamed through the open window. "Please! My grandmother. She needs help." Officer Jack looked up sharply. For a moment, their eyes met. Then the officer was running toward the house, radio raised to his lips. "Need emergency medical at 1242 Oak Street. Elderly woman down, possibly acute cardiac event." Sarah burst through the front door first, her pharmacy training kicking in. She knelt beside his grandmother, checking pulse and breathing. "Jack, get that ambulance here now." She pulled an emergency medical kit from her bag. "Marcus, when did this happen?" Just now." His voice cracked. "I was trying to get her medicine. That's why I was following you. I didn't know what else to do." Sarah squeezed his hand as she worked. "You did the right thing, calling for help now." "But I didn't dash." Marcus stopped as Officer Jack appeared in the doorway, face grim. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out." The officer surveyed the scene. Empty pill bottles on the nightstand, past due bills scattered on the floor, a boy trembling in a wet polo shirt. Marcus stood his ground. "Are you going to arrest me?" "For what?" Officer Jack's voice was surprisingly soft. "For trying to take care of your grandmother." Sirens grew louder. Emergency lights strobed through the windows. Marcus, Sarah said, still monitoring his grandmother's pulse. How long has she been out of medication? 3 days. The words felt like rocks in his throat. I've been splitting pills, trying to make them last. We couldn't afford the refills. Officer Jack spoke into his radio again, then turned to Marcus. The paramedics will want to know what medication she's supposed to be taking. Marcus pulled out the crumpled prescriptions one last time. Sarah read them quickly. I can have these filled within an hour. Jack. The officer nodded. I'll take care of it. Paramedics swarmed the room, their efficient movements pushing Marcus into the hallway. He watched them lift his grandmother onto a stretcher, attaching monitors and oxygen. She's stable, one reported. But we need to transport now. I'm going with her, Marcus said, his voice stronger than he felt. Officer Jack put a hand on his shoulder. We'll take you in the cruiser. Follow the ambulance. As they hurried downstairs, Sarah called after them. I'll meet you at the hospital with her medications. In the cruiser, Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool window, watching his grandmother's ambulance ahead. The same streets he'd been running through minutes ago now blurred past in a wash of emergency lights. I'm sorry, he whispered, not sure who he was talking to. Officer Jack glanced at him in the rearview mirror. For what? Loving your grandmother? Trying to keep her alive? For following your wife? For making you think that you were a threat? The officer shook his head. I should be the one apologizing. I saw what I expected to see, not what was really there. The cruiser's radio crackled. Sarah's voice came through. Jack, those prescriptions, they should have been refilled weeks ago. The insurance was declined. They've been paying cash, splitting pills. Marcus closed his eyes, shame burning his cheeks. Not anymore, Officer Jack said firmly. He looked at Marcus again. We're going to figure this out. All of it. But right now, let's focus on your grandmother. Okay. Marcus nodded, watching the ambulance's flashing lights guide them through the rain. Help had finally come. He just prayed it wasn't too late. The hospital waiting room clock read 9:47 a.m. Marcus sat rigid in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his wet clothes still clinging to his skin. Officer Jack stood by the window, speaking quietly into his phone. Every few minutes, medical staff hurried past, but none stopped to give news. Social services is on their way, Officer Jack said, pocketing his phone. Marcus's stomach lurched. I'm not leaving here. Nobody's asking you to. The officer sat beside him. But there are procedures we have to follow. Through the emergency room doors, Marcus caught a glimpse of Sarah's red blouse as she hurried past the nurse's station, carrying a pharmacy bag. Your grandmother's medications, Officer Jack explained. Sarah called in some favors to get them filled immediately. A doctor in blue scrubs approached them. Family of Helen Williams. Marcus jumped to his feet. How is she? Stable now. The combination of missed medications and dehydration created a dangerous situation. But we caught it in time. The doctor consulted his chart. However, I'm concerned about her home care situation. I take care of her, Marcus said quickly. The prescriptions. Marcus. Officer Jack's voice was gentle but firm. Let's hear the doctor out. The doctor nodded. Your grandmother needs consistent medication management and regular monitoring. From her records, I see she missed her last 3 appointments with her primary physician. We couldn't afford dash. I understand. The doctor's face softened. But without proper medical care, this will happen again. Next time, we might not be so lucky. A new voice joined the conversation. Perhaps I can help with that. A woman in a gray suit approached, holding a folder. I'm MS. Chen from Social Services. Officer Thompson called me. Marcus took an instinctive step back, bumping into Officer Jack. It's okay, son, the officer said quietly. Remember what I said? We're going to figure this out. MS. Chen sat in an empty chair, patting the seat next to her. Marcus, why don't we talk about some programs that could help your grandmother? And you? I don't need help. The words came out harsher than he intended. I just need to work more, save more money for her medicine. You need to be in school, Sarah said, joining them. She held up the pharmacy bag. These medications? They're not optional. Your grandmother's life depends on them. Marcus slumped in the chair beside MS. Chen, are you going to take me away from her? That's not my goal. MS. Chen opened her folder. My goal is to keep families together, safely. There are programs that can help with medical costs, home care assistance, even meal delivery. But Marcus. Officer Jack crouched in front of him. Remember this morning? When you finally asked for help? That took real courage. This is the same thing. Sarah touched his shoulder. Let us help. Please. The emergency room doors opened again. A nurse waved to them. She's asking for her grandson. Marcus looked at Officer Jack, who nodded. Go. We'll be here when you get back. His grandmother lay small and pale against white hospital sheets, and four in her arm and monitors beeping steadily. But her eyes were clear when they met his. Oh, baby. She reached for his hand. I'm so sorry. Don't. Marcus's voice cracked. I'm the one who should have gotten help sooner. I was just scared of losing me to the system. She squeezed his fingers. Like you lost your parents. He nodded, tears finally spilling over. Listen to me, Marcus Williams. Her voice gained strength. You haven't lost me. And you won't. But we need help, baby. We can't do this alone anymore. Through the room's window, he could see Officer Jack and Sarah talking with MS. Chen, their faces serious as they reviewed papers. They want to help, he admitted. But what if No more what ifs. His grandmother's tone was firm. You've been carrying this burden alone for too long. Let them help us carry it. A knock at the door interrupted them. MS. Chen entered, followed by the doctor. Mrs. Williams. MS. Chen smiled warmly. I'd like to talk to you about some resources we can provide. Marcus started to stand, but his grandmother held his hand tighter. Stay, baby. We do this together now. The next hour passed in a blur of forms and explanations. Medical assistance programs, home healthcare options, school support services. Each solution presented carefully, each fear addressed patiently. Officer Jack appeared in the doorway. Sarah's got the first round of medications ready. The pharmacist covering them until the assistance paperwork goes through. I can't accept Marcus's grandmother began. Yes, you can, Sarah said, joining them. Consider it payment for all the times you made me laugh when I was new at the pharmacy. Remember those jokes you used to tell? A faint blush colored his grandmother's cheeks. You were always such a good listener. And you, Sarah turned to Marcus. No more following me from a distance. If you need help, you come right up and ask. Deal. Marcus nodded, something tight in his chest finally beginning to loosen. MS. Chen closed her folder. I'll submit these applications today. Priority processing. For now, Mrs. Williams, the doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation. I'll stay, Marcus said immediately. Actually, Officer Jack cleared his throat. Sarah and I had another idea. If it's okay with your grandmother. Sarah stepped forward. We have a guest room. Just until she's released. It's closer to the hospital than your house, and I can help you learn about her medications. Marcus looked at his grandmother, who smiled. Go, baby. I'll be fine. You need real sleep in a real bed. I'll have an officer check on your house regularly, Jack added. Everything will be waiting when you're both ready to go home. Marcus touched the empty spot in his pocket where the prescriptions had been. No more following from shadows. No more counting pills in the dark. Okay, he said finally. Thank you. His grandmother's monitors beeped steadily, a rhythm like hope. The guest room at the Thompson house was bigger than Marcus's bedroom at home. He sat on the edge of the pristine bed, still in his damp clothes, staring at the phone Jack had given him, a direct line to his grandmother's hospital room. Hey! Sarah appeared in the doorway with folded clothes. These might be a bit big, but they're clean and dry. Marcus took them carefully. Thanks. Bathroom's down the hall. There are fresh towels, and I put out a new toothbrush. She paused. When's the last time you ate something real? His stomach answered with an embarrassing growl. That's what I thought. Get changed. Food will be ready in 20 minutes. The hot shower felt like washing away weeks of fear. Marcus stood under the spray until the water ran cold, then pulled on the borrowed clothes, a soft t-shirt and sweatpants that hung loose on his frame. Downstairs, he found Sarah in the kitchen. The smell of cooking food made him dizzy. Sit, she commanded, placing a plate of chicken and rice in front of him. Eat slowly. He took a small bite, then another. Soon the plate was empty. There's more, Sarah said, but Marcus shook his head. I should call Grandma first. Sarah handed him the phone. 3 rings, then his grandmother's voice. Baby? You okay? I'm fine. How are you feeling? Better. The doctors say my numbers are improving. She paused. MS. Chen came back. We talked more about the programs. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. And she thinks we'll qualify for everything we need. Medical assistance, home health aid visits, even some housing support for repairs. Really? Really? Her voice strengthened. No more splitting pills. No more missing appointments. Relief made him lightheaded. I'm sorry I didn't dash. Stop that. She cut him off. You did the best you could. We both did. But now we're doing better. After saying goodbye, Marcus found Sarah washing dishes. Your grandmother's strong, she said without turning around. Like you, I wasn't strong. I was scared. Being scared and being strong aren't opposites. She handed him a towel to dry. Jack should be home soon. He wants to talk to you. Marcus's stomach tightened. Am I in trouble? For following you? No. Sarah's voice was firm. But there are things we need to figure out. School? For one. The front door opened. Officer Jack's boots squeaked on the floor. Marcus, he called. Got a minute? In the living room, Jack had removed his uniform jacket but still wore his badge. He gestured for Marcus to sit. I talked to your principal, he began. And your teachers. Marcus stared at his borrowed socks. They are worried about you. Your grades were excellent until 2 months ago. What happened? Grandma's insurance expired. The bills started piling up. Marcus swallowed hard. I couldn't focus in class knowing she was home alone, running out of medicine. Jack nodded slowly. MS. Chen mentioned you've been missing a lot of school. I couldn't leave here. I understand that. But education is non-negotiable. Jack leaned forward. So here's what we're going to do. While your grandmother's in the hospital, you're going back to school. Sarah and I will handle the paperwork with MS. Chen, after school, if you want, you can help Sarah at the pharmacy, learn about the medications, understand how they work. Marcus looked up. You'd let me do that? After everything? Sarah's idea. She says you've got good instincts for it. Taking care of your grandmother, managing her medications. That takes knowledge and dedication. But first, Sarah added from the doorway, you need to take care of yourself. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Jack checked his phone and frowned. That's probably Jenkins from Social Services. They need to do an official home assessment. Marcus jumped up. I should be there. I know where everything is dash. No. Jack's voice was gentle but firm. You need rest. Let us handle this part. Sarah touched his shoulder. Try to sleep. We'll wake you if anything changes with your grandmother. Marcus watched from the guest room window as Jack left with a man in a suit. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too strange. He pulled out the phone, dialing his grandmother's room again. Can't sleep, baby? She knew him too well. Everything's happening so fast. I know, but maybe that's good. Like ripping off a bandage, hurts less than pulling it slow. The social workers are at our house. Good. Let them see. No more hiding. She yawned. Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow's a school day. The phone clicked off. Marcus lay back on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Down the hall, he could hear Sarah talking quietly on her own phone, probably discussing medication schedules with the hospital. His eyelids grew heavy. When was the last time he'd really slept? A car door slammed outside. Marcus jerked awake, not realizing he'd dozed off. Jack's voice carried up the stairs. Worse than we thought. The furnace is shot. Electrical needs updating. We'll figure it out, Sarah replied. One thing at a time. Marcus slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The boy's been living like that, Sarah. No heat, barely any food, trying to keep his grandmother alive on split pills and prayer. And now we know. Now we can help. If he lets us, he will. Sarah's voice was certain. He's tired of running. Tired of being scared. Marcus pressed his forehead against the wall. They were right. He was tired. So tired. Tomorrow, Jack was saying, I'll talk to some guys at the station. See if we can organize a work detail. Get that house up to code. One thing at a time, Sarah repeated. Right now, he needs sleep. And school. And to know he's not alone anymore. Marcus crept back to bed. The borrowed clothes soft against his skin. Through the window, he could see his street in the distance. His empty house. Tomorrow, he'd go back to school. Tomorrow, there would be more papers to sign, more changes to face. But tonight, his grandmother was safe in the hospital, getting stronger. Tonight, there were no pills to count, no bills to hide. Tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus slept without fear. Monday morning hit like a splash of cold water. Marcus stood in front of Central Middle School, wearing clean clothes Sarah had bought over the weekend. Students streamed past him, their chatter a dull roar in his ears. "You've got this," Sarah had said, dropping him off. "Remember, I'll pick you up after school. We'll go straight to the hospital." His grandmother was getting discharged tomorrow. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Marcus Williams. He turned to find Principal Stevens watching him. Behind her stood Mrs. Peterson, the counselor. "Welcome back," the principal said. "We missed you." The counselor stepped forward. "Could you come with us for a moment?" Marcus followed them to the office, his new backpack heavy with actual books instead of hidden pill bottles. Officer Jack had insisted on buying supplies. "Education is non-negotiable," he'd repeated. In the principal's office, Ms. Chen from Social Services waited with another woman Marcus didn't recognize. "This is Dr. Martinez, Ms. Chen explained. "She's a child psychologist who works with our department." Marcus's hands clenched. "I don't need a psychologist." "Maybe not," Dr. Martinez said calmly. "But you've been carrying adult responsibilities for a long time. Sometimes that leaves marks we can't see." "I'm fine. Are you?" Mrs. Peterson leaned forward. "You were our top student, Marcus. Then suddenly, assignments stopped coming in. You fell asleep in class. Missed days. My grandmother needed me." "Yes, she did, Ms. Chen's voice was gentle. "And you stepped up beautifully. But now it's time to let the adults step up for you." Principal Stevens cleared her throat. "We've arranged a modified schedule. You'll have time to make up missed work. And Mrs. Peterson will be available whenever you need to talk. And I'll be here every Thursday," Dr. Martinez added. "Just to check in." Marcus stared at his new shoes. "Do I have a choice?" "About seeing me?" "Yes." Dr. Martinez smiled. "About accepting help?" "That choice was made the moment you followed Mrs. Thompson to the pharmacy." The bell rang. Principal Stevens stood. "Your teachers know you're with us. Take a few minutes if you need them." One by one, they left until only Ms. Chen remained. "Your grandmother's house passed preliminary inspection," she said. "Officer Thompson organized a volunteer crew. They're starting repairs today." Marcus looked up sharply. "Really? Really? New furnace, updated wiring, basic repairs." She paused. "The community wants to help, Marcus. Will you let them?" Before he could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Jack stood there in uniform. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Got a minute, Marcus?" Ms. Chen gathered her papers. "We're done here. Remember what I said?" Marcus followed Jack outside to his cruiser. "Is Grandma okay?" "She's fine. Better than fine." Jack leaned against the car. "But there's something you should see." They drove in silence through familiar streets. As they turned onto Oak Street, Marcus's breath caught. His house was surrounded by police cars, but not the usual kind. These were personal vehicles, their owners in various stages of uniform, carrying tools and equipment. "What's happening? Remember those guys from the station I mentioned?" Jack parked. "Turns out a lot of them do construction work on the side. When they heard about your situation, a tall officer Marcus recognized from the neighborhood waved from the roof. "Hey, kid. Hope you don't mind. Your shingles were shot." Another called from inside. "Jack, this furnace isn't just old, it's dangerous. Good thing we caught it now." Marcus stumbled out of the cruiser. Everywhere he looked, officers worked. Fixing, replacing, rebuilding. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why are they doing this?" "Because that's what community means." Jack put a hand on his shoulder. "And maybe because some of us feel bad about assuming the worst when we saw you following Sarah. I should have just asked for help." "Yes, you should have. But fear makes us do strange things." Jack squeezed his shoulder. "Speaking of Sarah, she's expecting you at the pharmacy after school. Ready to head back?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Teachers were understanding, classmates curious but not unkind. When the final bell rang, Sarah waited in the parking lot as promised. "Good day?" she asked as he got in. "Weird day." He told her about the officers at his house. Jack's been planning that since Friday. She smiled. He felt guilty about suspecting you. We both did. At the pharmacy, Sarah led him behind the counter for the first time. First lesson, she said, pulling out his grandmother's prescriptions. Let's talk about what these actually do and why they can't be split or skipped. For the next hour, she explained each medication, how they worked, why timing mattered, what happens when doses are missed. I should have known all this before, Marcus said quietly. You did the best you could with what you knew. Sarah showed him how to measure blood pressure. Now you'll know more. Do better. His phone buzzed, a text from Jack. House passed inspection. Full approval for home healthcare starting tomorrow. Sarah read the message over his shoulder. See, things are falling into place. I'm still scared. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Of what? Everything going wrong again. Losing her. Being alone. Sarah set down the blood pressure cuff. Marcus, look at me. You're not alone anymore. Jack and I live 3 blocks away. You have my number, his number, MS. Chen's number. The whole police force is literally rebuilding your house. But no buts. Your grandmother is coming home tomorrow to a safe house with working heat. She'll have her medications, proper medical care, and you, back in school where you belong. Marcus picked up a pill bottle. Reading the label he now understood. I just wanted to keep her safe. I know. And you did. Sarah touched his arm. But now it's time to let others help keep you both safe. His phone buzzed again. A picture from Jack, officers gathering on his front lawn. Tired but smiling. Repairs nearly complete. Ready to see your grandmother? Sarah asked, hanging up her lab coat. Tell her about the house. Marcus nodded, something warm expanding in his chest. Maybe this was what hope felt like. As they drove to the hospital, he watched his neighborhood pass by. The streets where he'd once hidden in shadows now felt different. Brighter somehow. Tomorrow, his grandmother would come home. Tomorrow, they'd start their new normal. But today he finally understood what it meant to ask for help. And to receive it. The morning of his grandmother's homecoming dawned clear and cool. Marcus paced the Thompsons' guest room, already dressed in the new clothes Sarah had insisted on buying. A stack of completed makeup assignments sat in his backpack. He'd stayed up late finishing them, determined to start fresh. Marcus. Sarah called up the stairs. Breakfast. In the kitchen, Jack sat in full uniform, reading the paper. Big day, kid. Marcus picked at his toast. What if something goes wrong? Like what? Sarah set a glass of orange juice in front of him. What if the home health aide doesn't show up? Or the medications aren't right? Or Marcus. Jack lowered his paper. Everything's in place. MS. Chen personally verified all the arrangements. A car horn beeped outside. Sarah looked out the window. That's Nancy, your home health aide. Right on time. Marcus recognized the woman from the hospital. She'd spent yesterday afternoon training with his grandmother's medical team. Ready. Sarah grabbed her pharmacy coat. The drive to the hospital felt both too long and too short. In the back seat, Marcus clutched the folder MS. Chen had given him schedules, phone numbers, emergency contacts. His grandmother sat ready in a wheelchair when they arrived, looking stronger than he'd seen her in months. There's my boy. She held out her arms. Marcus hugged her carefully, mindful of the 4 bruises. The house is ready. So I heard. She smiled at Jack. Officer Thompson's been keeping me updated. Seems half the police force turned into carpenters. More like 3/4, Jack grinned. And wait till you see what they did with the kitchen. The discharge process took an hour. Nancy reviewed medications with Sarah while Jack loaded a wheelchair and other equipment into his cruiser. Finally, they were ready. Marcus held his grandmother's arm as she settled into the car. Nervous, baby? A little, he admitted. Me too. She patted his hand. But good nervous. Like Christmas morning nervous. The drive home felt different in daylight. No more skulking in shadows. No more watching from a distance. They turned onto Oak Street, and his grandmother gasped. The house looked different. Fresh paint, new roof, repaired steps. Even the lawn had been mowed. Oh my, she whispered. Oh my. Officers lined the sidewalk, some in uniform, some in work clothes. Their families stood with them, holding covered dishes and gift bags. Welcome home, Mrs. Williams. They called as Jack helped her from the car. Marcus saw Mrs. Peterson from school. Principal Stevens. Even Dr. Martinez stood among the crowd. The community wanted to celebrate, Sarah explained, supporting his grandmother's other side. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. New furnace humming quietly. Fresh paint everywhere. The kitchen gleamed with updated appliances. Whole place is up to code now, Jack said proudly. Plus some extras. Watch this. He opened a panel by the front door. Direct line to dispatch. Any emergency. Just push this button. Nancy was already setting up the medical equipment in his grandmother's room. Everything's organized by schedule. Marcus, want to see how it works? For the next hour, she showed him the new system. Medications pre-sorted into labeled containers. Monitoring equipment with clear instructions. A tablet loaded with medical information and direct lines to doctors. This is a lot, his grandmother said, overwhelmed. That's why I'm here. Nancy smiled. We'll figure it out together. The house filled with visitors bringing food and gifts. Ms. Chen arrived with more paperwork, applications approved, assistance confirmed. Everything's in order, she told Marcus quietly. You can focus on school now. School. The word no longer filled him with dread. Sarah organized the kitchen while Jack installed safety rails in the bathroom. Marcus watched them all, these people who'd become more than neighbors. Quite a change, his grandmother said, finding him in the doorway. I'm sorry I didn't ask for help sooner. You were protecting me. She touched his cheek. But now we're protecting each other. All of us. That evening, after the visitors left, they sat in the living room, Marcus, his grandmother, Jack, Sarah, and Nancy. The new furnace kept the room comfortably warm. Schedule for tomorrow, Nancy reviewed. I'll arrive at 7. Marcus goes to school at 8. Sarah will pick him up for pharmacy training at 3. And I'll drive by on my rounds, Jack added. Just to check in, Marcus looked around the room, at these people who'd become his safety net. Thank you. All of you. That's what family does, Sarah said simply. Family. The word settled warm in his chest. Later, in his own bed for the first time in days, Marcus listened to the quiet house. No more counting pills in the dark. No more lying awake wondering about tomorrow. His phone lit up with a text from Jack. Sleep well, kid. You've earned it. Another from Sarah. Proud of you. See you tomorrow. Down the hall, he heard his grandmother's steady breathing. Nancy had helped her into bed, medications properly measured and taken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. School. Training. Learning to trust this new normal. But tonight, Marcus realized something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he wasn't doing it alone. 1 month later, Marcus stood behind the pharmacy counter, carefully measuring blood pressure medication under Sarah's watchful eye. His white trainee coat felt strange but right, like stepping into a new version of himself. Perfect, Sarah nodded. You're getting good at this. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up to see his grandmother walking in, actually walking, with just a cane for support. Nancy followed close behind. Look who felt strong enough for a short walk, Nancy announced proudly. Marcus hurried around the counter. Grandma, you should have called. I would have dashed. Let an old lady surprise her grandson. His grandmother's eyes sparkled. Besides, I had Nancy with me. And look who we met on the way. Officer Jack appeared in the doorway, grinning. Found these ladies taking a stroll. Thought I'd escort them the rest of the way. Sarah emerged from the back, carrying a cake. Perfect timing. Marcus, remember what day it is? He blinked, then smiled. 1 month since coming home. 1 month of proper medications, regular meals, and steady progress for both of them. My boy's becoming a proper pharmacy assistant, his grandmother said proudly, settling into a chair Sarah quickly provided. He's a natural, Sarah agreed. Watch this, Marcus, explained Mom's new medication schedule. Marcus straightened his trainee coat. Morning dose includes blood pressure medication, best taken with food. Heart medication split between morning and evening, never on an empty stomach. The new supplements dash, show off, Jack teased, but his eyes were proud. Nancy checked her watch. Blood pressure time, Mrs. Williams. Marcus, want to do the honors? He pulled out the electronic cuff they'd been practicing with. His hands moved confidently now, sure of each step. 120/80, he announced. Perfect. Thanks to you, his grandmother touched his arm. All of you? Sarah cut the cake while Jack poured coffee. Through the pharmacy windows, Marcus could see neighbors waving as they passed. No more suspicious glances. No more worried whispers. Oh! His grandmother remembered something. Show them your report card. Baby. Marcus pulled the envelope from his pocket. Straight A's again. Principal Stevens had personally congratulated him this morning. Math test next week, he said. Mrs. Peterson's been helping me catch up. And the sessions with Dr. Martinez? Nancy asked gently. Getting easier. It was true. Talking about his fears, his parents, the months of struggling alone. It helped more than he'd expected. Jack's radio crackled. Thompson, you copy. Go ahead. Just checking. Still on for Saturday? My kids are excited about the basketball game. Marcus smiled. Saturday pickup games had become a tradition. Officers and their families, neighborhood kids, even some of his classmates joined in. Wouldn't miss it, Jack replied, winking at Marcus. Sarah began gathering paper plates. Almost time for my shift to start. Marcus, ready for today's lesson? We're covering drug interactions. His grandmother stood carefully. That's our cue to head home, Nancy. Physical therapy exercises await. I'll drive you, Jack offered. It's on my patrol route anyway. Marcus watched them leave, his grandmother walking taller each day, Nancy vigilant but not hovering, Jack chatting easily about neighborhood news. Penny for your thoughts? Sarah asked, adjusting his trainee coat. Just thinking about that morning, when I finally came into the pharmacy instead of watching from outside. Scared to death but still brave enough to try. She squeezed his shoulder. That's real courage, you know. Asking for help when you need it. The pharmacy door chimed again. A young mother entered, looking worried, clutching prescriptions. Ready to help? Sarah asked. Marcus nodded, straightening his name tag. He knew that look, the fear, the uncertainty. He'd worn it himself not so long ago. Welcome to Thompson Pharmacy, he said warmly. How can we help? The woman relaxed slightly at his smile. These prescriptions. I'm not sure I understand the instructions. That's what we're here for. He gestured to the consultation area. Let's figure it out together. As he explained each medication, Marcus caught Sarah watching proudly. Through the window, he saw Jack's cruiser pass slowly, not suspicious anymore, just protective. His phone buzzed, a text from his grandmother. Nancy says my numbers are good enough for TWO walks tomorrow. Race you to the corner. Marcus smiled, typing back. You're on. Winner gets extra dessert. The young mother left clutching her prescriptions, fear replaced with understanding. Just like him, Marcus thought. Just like him and his grandmother, finding their way from darkness to light. Ready for the next lesson? Sarah asked, pulling out training materials. Ready, Marcus said, and he meant it. The afternoon sun streamed through the pharmacy windows, catching his name tag, Marcus Williams, pharmacy assistant trainee. Below it, a smaller tag Jack had given him, junior community officer. Outside, life moved in its new rhythm. Neighbors greeted each other. Police cruisers patrolled peacefully. His grandmother would be doing exercises with Nancy, getting stronger every day. And here he stood, no longer in shadows, no longer afraid. Here he stood in the light. Home.